Here recently, I've been in a place where all of a sudden being still started to feel like being stuck. I read in the Bible, like back in high school or something, that a person in the Bible felt like they were a slave. They said that they were essentially willing to be a slave for God. I remember when I read that, I was like, a slave, that's a strong word. Being a servant sounds a lot more cuter, but being a slave? But that's exactly how I found myself feeling. I just started feeling like everything was dead around me, and I felt dead in a dead place. I knew I wasn't giving up on God. I knew I wasn't giving up on what it is that He had promised me. But everything just felt so dry. My faith, everything, it just felt so dry. I know a lot of people don't really talk about this or speak on this, but being a follower, being faithful is not always fun. It's not always cute. It's not always skipping through a field of daisies and roses. No. Sometimes it gets ugly. Sometimes you just find yourself in a place where it's like, God, I know I love you, but right now I'm not in I'm not in the mood to pray. I'm not in the mood to read my Bible. I don't want to hear a prophetic word. I feel dry. All of a sudden, I feel a little too still. I feel stuck. I felt really empty. I felt alone. I was just having one of those moments where it's like everything around me already feels dead. So what would be the big deal if I went back to something dead? We ended up going to Dallas, my hometown. And while I was there, I felt the pressure of, just sticking my toe in the water. You know what I mean? I knew I didn't want to jump in, but at the same time, sometimes when you get to this place where it's too much of what you perceive as stagnation, you feel like nothing is gratifying you, nothing is satisfying you. And there was this person there that I wanted to see, but at the same time, I knew that I didn't have any reason or need to see. I knew what would possibly, but not even possibly, I knew what would come about me seeing this person. And so I was just like, I'm not going to hit this person up. I'm going to leave them where they at. But while I'm there, I'm still having these feelings like I'm not happy with where I am. Like, I just feel stuck. I feel like I am in such a dry place right now. But I was trying to hold out. I was like, okay, I am not going to hit this man up. And next thing you know, I haven't talked to this person in like a month and a half. And they text me, they called me. And I'm like, wow, what are the odds that I'm in Dallas? Then not to mention, while we were on our way to Dallas, I drove the last hour. And because of this car wreck that I had back in high school, sometimes I have a lot of anxiety when I'm driving on the road, the highways, especially at nighttime. I'll start feeling all jittery and my palms will be sweating, just anxiety, feeling like I'm going to lose control of the vehicle. I'm going to end up running off the road. Just the enemy will start really trying to play with my mind. And of course, I was trying to speak against that. I was trying to calm myself down, all of that. While this was happening, I was thinking about this person and thinking about whether or not I wanted to see them, what would come about it. And out of nowhere, the car that's in front of me, they just come to a complete stop. They didn't go slamming on the brakes, but at the same time, they came to a complete stop in the middle of the highway. I didn't have enough time to get over. I wasn't even in the mental place to get over, so I just hit the brakes as well. And so I'm thinking, is there something in the road? Was there a wreck? What's going on? But no, this car just picks up the gas and keeps going. And I knew that that was a sign. I knew that God was speaking to me that, hey, if you interact with this person, there's going to be some type of halt. So fast forward, I'm thinking about this person again. I'm starting to lean more towards, okay, I think I am, even though I know that I shouldn't. And then boom, they ended up calling and texting me. And so we ended up hanging out. This person is somebody who was once supposed to be my husband. Not based off of my own feelings and emotions, but God actually spoke through somebody that this was my husband. And I remember I told God, if this is really you, you're going to have to tell me 3 times. And God did just that. It's not about, I think maybe it could have been. No, I know for a fact that this person was supposed to be my husband. We're just riding around, talking, things like that. And I remember I was sitting in the car thinking like, wow, I just blew it. I don't deserve God. I don't deserve the promise. I don't deserve my ministry. I'm not ready. It's not time. I'm tripping. I was just like beating myself up because I'm like, I said I wasn't going to go back to this. I said I wasn't going to go back to that. I just truly felt in my heart that I was done with it. I wasn't interested in it anymore. But yet, here I am doing something I said I was not going to do. So I was judging myself heavily. All this time, I felt such a need to feel perfect in God's eyes. I felt like I needed to earn his love, earn his affection, earn his attention. I felt like if I didn't remain perfect, God was going to just like throw me away and get rid of me and not find me worthy. Once I fully decided to turn away from my sin and to not continue walking in iniquity, I found myself on this spiritual plateau. And I thought that in order for me to have everything that God has promised me, I had to remain on this plateau. And the minute that I stepped off of it, I was going to hell. I was going to be deemed unworthy. I was going to be deemed unfaithful. And God was going to be done with me. And I know some of these feelings, some of these failed expectations of being perfect stemmed from my childhood, stemmed from me always feeling like, okay, am I just not doing enough? Or am I giving my all and it's just not enough? I would constantly try to prove myself to my parents, my teachers, and I felt like if I didn't achieve perfection, or if I didn't achieve what it was that they had spoke over me, then I failed and I was not good enough. And so because I never worked that out on my own, it spilled over into my relationship with God. So like I said, I'm sitting in this car like, wow, I just blew it. I don't deserve God at all. God speaks to me and he says, you needed to see that you can trust me. And he said, had and needed at the same time. You had to see that you can trust me. Sometimes when God speaks to me, I can fully sense his spirit behind what it is that he's saying. And sometimes it's not as clear, or sometimes I can't at all. But when he said that, I could sense in his spirit that he was saying to me, you needed to know that I'm not going anywhere. You needed to know that I love you. And my love is not conditional. You're so used to conditional love that you're failing to see my love is unconditional. There is no separating you from my love. You can rely on me. You can trust me to get you out of any and every situation. You can trust that I am always going to be consistent, everlasting. My love is always going to be unfailing. Then he says to me, if your eyes were open, you would not be here. He said, what would it look like if you were standing in the room of surprises? I've talked about this room of surprises in multiple videos, but if you've never seen any of my videos before, the room of surprises is this room that God showed me that's full of gifts, full of presents of all sorts of shapes, sizes, and they're wrapped really beautifully, past beautiful. Words just cannot describe the beauty, the magnitude of this room. As he said that to me, I seen myself in this room and I was looking down at my hands, and I had in my hand this absolutely beautiful gift. It was wrapped so beautifully and it just shined so brightly to the point I could barely even stand to look at it. Then I was sitting down in a chair and I had this huge box in my hand. It was almost like cartoonish because in reality I couldn't hold a box that huge. This box was as big as an 18-wheeler, a huge box. And this is just one gift. And so I answered him and I said it would be bright, blinding. And in that moment, he removed all the tops, all of the wrappings off of these gifts. And the light, the glory that shined from them was just absolutely blinding. And I was sitting in a car riding around with this guy about to cry. Because I'm just like, wow, things truly did change. Things is really not the same anymore. I wish y'all could have been there, okay? I wish you could just see this room, the way that his glory shined off of these presents, off of these gifts. And as he was showing me this, as he was saying this to me, we were riding downtown or coming up on downtown, and I could see the full skyline. And I've seen this same skyline hundreds of times, but I don't know what it was about that night, but it was just absolutely beautiful. And as I'm looking at this skyline, it went from night, because it was night at the time, to day. Like I had a vision of this skyline, of the sky, and it was extremely bright. And in that moment, God said, a monument. Because this beautiful place, this place that I once loved, this place that I once enjoyed, the same place that I begged and begged God to take me away from, is now a monument. It holds something that was once dead. When I left there, something stayed behind. So then fast forward, I get back home to where I live now. And I could sense in the spirit that when I was entertaining these different dead things, like I said earlier in the video, I had put my toe in the water. I put my feet in the water. But Satan, I could feel him spiritually trying to push me into the water, trying to get me to jump head first into the water. I could feel him trying to pin me up against dead things, dead people, dead behaviors, dead thoughts. I wanted to entertain these dead things because I still felt dead. I still felt like everything was dead around me. It coming back home, it just furthermore made me feel out of place. It made me feel like I am just somewhere I am not supposed to be. I am somewhere that is dead. As I'm trying to go back to these things, as I'm trying to possibly entertain these things, there was just such a disinterest. I just kept on saying, like, I am not interested. I am not interested. I am not interested. Because what was once fun for me, what was once cute to me, what was once a good time is not a good time. It's not enjoyable. To be interested in something is to excite curiosity or attention. If you are interested in something, then you have an engaged or aroused interest. Being in a dead place, dwelling amongst the grave, is all that I know. It's all that my life has been. There hasn't been any good days. There hasn't been any good seasons. There hasn't been any good moments. It has all been dead. In the past, that was my go-to because that's all that I knew. Of course, now I know that I have something to turn to. I know that I have somebody who is going to be there each and every time. But like I said earlier in the video, every day with God is not fun. It's not exciting. Sometimes you find yourself in a place with God that it doesn't make sense. It's not even that you're mad at him. It's not even that you feel like you don't trust him. It just feels like, look, this place that I'm in, it's gotten old. So old, so stale, to the point I just cannot even stand it. I ended up taking a walk one night, and as I'm walking, God says to me, "Doesn't this feel familiar?" And I knew exactly what he was talking about. He was talking about this weird emptiness, this weird place of vulnerability that I tend to feel right after I found myself letting go of something or making the right choice regarding something. So then God begins to minister to me, and he says that I'm in a new place spiritually, but I'm in the same place physically. I'm in the same surrounding, and that contributes to me feeling stuck. It contributes to everything around me feeling so dead, because it is dead. But I am not dead. I may feel stale, but I am not dead. What it is that God has spoken over me most definitely is not dead, and it's not as unobtainable as it feels. I know that God is going to do what he says he's going to do. But sometimes when you get so far out in your faith, when you start believing God for these crazy blessings, impossible blessings, when reality or what you perceive as reality sinks in and you really take a look around you, sometimes you could start feeling a little crazy. You could start feeling like, well, is it really time? Am I really ready? Although that place, that vulnerability, that emptiness that I began to feel once more was something that I've experienced before, I haven't experienced it in this new way. Because in the past, that pressure, that tension wouldn't just send me back to get my feet wet. It would send me back diving head first into my sin. That same feeling of judgment, self-judgment, that same feeling of, I just blew it. I just messed it up. I'm not deserving of God. I'm not deserving of the promise, would have me going back to my old ways and staying there. But the disinterest that I met trying to go back made me feel even more stuck. It just further confirmed to me I don't have any place there. And on one end, it made me feel more stuck. But on the other end, it made me think about all those past times when I would make the right decision or when I would choose to let something go. And I would find myself in this weird place, in this sad place. There was always something positive that transpired right after that. So I know that God was saying he had to show me, he had to allow me to see that nothing will separate his love from me. There is no level or plateau of perfection in God. The goal is not to be sinless. That's a false expectation. The goal isn't even not to sin, because we know that we all are going to fall short of the glory. The goal is to remain faithful, and through our faithfulness, we are blameless. God doesn't give up on the wicked. What does that mean for the righteous? What does that mean for the chosen? When it comes to the chosen, when it comes to the faithful, even our sin works for our good. Even our sin is ordered in God's purpose. I used to walk on eggshells with God, afraid to mess up, afraid He won't accept my prayer of repentance, afraid He won't accept my prayers of guilt. I used to have so much anxiety surrounding being perfect in God's eyes, to the point I would beat myself up over every little mistake I made, over every single time that I fell short, as if God's love is conditional. For so many years, I felt like I didn't even deserve God, as if He didn't choose me. If God chooses you, who can change His mind? If you are chosen by God, who can change His mind? Not to say that I can just get out here and do whatever it is that I please and do things on my own time and take things into my own hands and think that everything is going to work out. But even if I did, God has a way of making sure that His plan prevails. He has a way of pulling you out of the pit, pulling you out of your sin. I remember I did not want to be on YouTube making no video. I didn't want to tell nobody about my testimony. I didn't want to be in a pulpit on a street. I didn't want to be nowhere preaching, prophesying. I was not interested in that. I did not feel worthy of that. I felt like that was something unachievable. I felt way too dirty, way too worthless, way too ashamed to do such a thing. But yet and still, some way, somehow, God turned my head around. He changed my mind. He changed my heart. He changed my thoughts. He changed my habits, to the point certain things that I used to love doing, certain things that I would do and feel absolutely no remorse. The thought of me going back, the thought of me doing those things, as tempting or enticing as they may feel or seem at the time, I'm disinterested in. And that reminds me of David, because everybody talks about David and Goliath, but people don't really talk about David and Bathsheba. I remember one of the first times that I read the story of David and Bathsheba, I felt disappointed in David, not out of judgment, but out of fear, because I thought that God gave up on him. Or when I read about what he did, because of my own false, failed expectations, I thought that there was no room for David to be put right with God again. In 2 Samuel 7:11, it talks about how David was walking around the palace, the roof of the palace, and he ended up seeing Bathsheba bathing. And when he seen her, he must have felt some type of way, because he sent for her. Bathsheba was a married woman, and they ended up having sex with each other, and Bathsheba got pregnant. And then David called her husband back from the war in hopes that her husband would then sleep with her, and when the baby came, assumed that it was his child. But the man wasn't trying to do that, so instead, David essentially got the man killed on the battlefield, and then turned around and married this woman. The same David that was anointed as king, the same David that God loved so dearly, the same David who wrote chapters in the book of Psalms, the same David that God had chosen since birth. The other day I went back and read this story, and I really connected to David, because I truly feel like David struggled with unworthiness, with smallness, and with having closed eyes to what it is that God has called him to do as well. Sometimes really seeing in fullness what God has been speaking to you, the role he has called you to walk in, it can feel like staring into the sun. You can't stare into the sun for a long period of time. You can't help but to look away. It's like in all actuality, you can't really even fault a person for not being able to fully stand in front of what God is calling them to do and just be like, okay, cool. I can do that. We can do that, God. Cool. And I feel like that is why I can find myself seeing what it is that God has called me to do. I can be confronted with the promises, and on one end, I'm able to look that thing right in the eyes, in awe, in amazement, in excitement. But then the light is so blinding, it's so bright. Sometimes I can't help but to look away. David knew that he was going to be king. It's not like when David became king that it took him by surprise or he was shocked. Because on one end, this is something that he had known for quite some time. But on the other end, there is something about being right there at the promise. When it's not a matter of I'm still waiting, time is still ticking, where is it at? But when you are finally right there, that moment can sometimes come with a level of disbelief or a level of awe, where it just takes a moment to fully wrap your mind around it. Because a while back, I remember reading 2 Samuel 5:12, and it says, "Then David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people." Before verse 12, it talks about how all the men gathered together to build David's palace. So it's while David is seeing all these people coming together, putting this palace together, that it really finally hit him. Wow, I am really the king. God has really did what it was that he said he would do. I am truly standing in the promise. I remember when I read that a while back, I was like, why would it say that then David knew that the Lord had established him king when God had already told him that he was going to be king? He already anointed him. And they weren't building a palace just to be building one. They were building a palace for David, for the king. But isn't that just like us now? We can be standing right in the promise. Things can be happening, but yet it's like, but am I in the promise? You know that you are in the promise. I know that things are different. Although they may still look the same, I can see that there are doors that are beginning to open, things that are beginning to change. They haven't fully changed, but they are changing. They're in the process of changing. So when I read this again recently, that's when I realized, like, it seems to me that David struggled with possible unworthiness, feeling small, and having closed eyes towards what it is that God has called him to do, called him to be. In 2 Samuel 7, verse 18 to 19 says, "Then King David went and sat before the Lord, and he said, 'Who am I, servant Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me this far? And as if this were not enough in your sight, sovereign Lord, you have also spoken about the future of the house of your servant. And this decree, sovereign Lord, is for a mere human.'" That sounds to me that David felt small in comparison to what it is that God had called him to be. And I can't help but wonder, did this contribute to what it was that David did with Bathsheba? Because I knew that David knew that that was not cool. I know that he knew that that was not what God would have him to do. But yet and still, God knew what David would do before David was anointed as king, and he still appointed him ruler and king. This is the David that still defeated Goliath. God still never left him. Sometimes I play different things from the Bible in the Message version for my son. And Psalm 103 was already open, and I just pressed play in the Bible app. And the whole psalm really stuck out to me, especially as it relates to this word that God gave me. And in part it says, God is sheer mercy and grace, not easily angered. He's rich in love. He doesn't endlessly nag and scold, nor hold grudges forever. He doesn't treat us as our sins deserve, nor pay us back in full for our wrongs. As high as heaven is over the earth, so strong is his love to those who fear him. And as far as sunrise is from sunset, he has separated us from our sins. As parents feel for their children, God feels for those who fear him. He knows us inside and out, keeps in mind that we're made of mud. And that reminded me of something that happened with my own son and I. I can't remember what it was, but there was something that I was trying to tell my son to do or to stop doing. And so I said to him, I keep telling you this over and over. Stop doing this, stop doing that, or something like that. And God said to me, just like you. And fast forward as we're listening to Psalm 103, and I'm thinking about everything, it made me think how it would be a failed, false expectation for me to believe that my son is always going to be well-mannered, always going to follow directions, always going to do what it is that I tell him to do. And when he is disobedient, when he does fall short of my desires for him or even my expectations for him, it does not mean in any way that he doesn't love me, and it does not mean in any way that he doesn't reverence me as his mother. And in the same sense, we are God's children. Just like David said, I am a mere human. Compared to you, God, I am nothing. I am dumb and useless. But God knew that when he called you. He knew that when he chose you, when he appointed you. We cannot mess up God's plan for us. There is no messing up God's plan. If God called for something, if God chose us for something, his plan is going to prevail. We've put in too much work. We got way too far with the Lord for his plans to not now prevail. God can change his mind. God can do whatever it is that he pleases to do. But if God chooses you for something, when you are chosen for something from birth, there is no stopping it. God wants you to let go of that failed expectation that one day you are going to completely mess up with him, or that you had to live your life walking on eggshells, wondering, is God still pleased with me? Does God still love me? Does God still deem me qualified? Does God still deem me suitable? God chose you. He appointed you. And with God, there is no room to fail.